Hey guys, Sarak here, and today I'm bringing you my Swordsoul deck. This is one of my favourite decks of the past year or so, and it got all its reprints in Magnificent Mavens, and the deck is now under £100 or $100, depending on where you are, to buy pretty much the entire deck outside of a copy of Baronne de Fleur. So, let's get into the profile. We have 3 copies of Swordsoul of Mo Ye. So, all the Swordsouls have an effect that makes a token. This token is a level 4 tuner. While that token is on the field, you can only summon monsters from the extra deck if they're synchro monsters. So that's the condition they apply. They all have a different way of making the token. So Mo Ye makes it by revealing a Swordsoul in your hand. Then they all have an effect when they go to the graveyard for a synchro summon. So, if Mo Ye goes to the graveyard, you get to draw a card. This is really important for refilling your hand, keeping up that advantage that you inherently lose by making synchros. And it's just very, very important, as well as allowing you to put... Because when you make Qixing, its effect and Mo Ye's effect will go on the chain at the same time. Therefore, you can choose which one is Chainlink 1 and make it harder to stop the effect you need to resolve. It's less good in the later stages of the game because you have to have a card in hand, so a Swordsoul or a worm monster in hand to use its effect, but it's so important to see it at some point that we need to play 3. Next up, we have 3 copies of Swordsoul Strategist Longyuan. Longyuan discards a Swordsoul or worm monster to summon itself, then immediately makes a token. This is all one effect, so either the whole thing resolves or none of it does. Although the token summoning effect is optional, but they cannot summon it, and then your opponent cannot imperm it to stop you getting the token. You either make the token, or you either summon this card and don't make the token because you choose to, or the whole thing gets negated and you don't summon this card. And then, if this goes to the graveyard for a synchro, you burn your opponent for 1200. Very, very good for winning it in time. Then we have 2 copies of Swordsoul of Taiya. This is the most important one in the later stages of the game, where you're in top deck wars, because this is the card that banishes from the graveyard to make a token. Also, very, very good target for Baxia, either to make Baxia, or to summon off Baxia's effect, and then banish it, make a token, make a Qixing, and go it from there. So, and then when this one goes to the graveyard, you get to dump a Swordsoul or a worm monster from the deck to the graveyard. Normally, you're going to be dumping a Tenyi for its effect that you can use if you have another way of putting a non-effect monster onto the field. You may also dump another Swordsoul if you're going into something like Baxia. So you can summon this, make a token, make Baxia, spin 2 things. Taiya's effect dumps Mo Ye, Baxia revives Mo Ye reveal, synchro again. So it's the best one in the later stages of the game. We then have our Tenyis. We are playing a full house of Tenyis today. We're playing the 3 Adhara. This is a level 1 tuner, very, very important. Allows us access to Yazi with Longyuan, and also allows us to make level 8s with our Tenyis, and allows us access to level 9s. Mainly Chao Feng. So, all the Tenyis have the same effect. If you control no effect monsters, summon this card from your hand. If you control a non-effect monster, you get to do something else. Adhara allows you to banish it from your hand or graveyard, then target a banished worm monster and add it to your hand. This is really important for recycling your Swordsouls and your Tenyis, again, to keep that advantage in your hand. Sometimes, this deck really, really doesn't mind things like getting Nibiru'd, because putting a big token on your field just means all the Tenyis get to go off. And so on. So Nibiru can be less backbreaking than you think if your opponent can't out the token easily. We then have 3 copies of Tenyi Spirit Ashuna. This is the light Tenyi. If you control no effect monsters, summon this card from your hand, and then banish this card from hand or graveyard to summon a Tenyi monster from your deck except itself, and then it locks you into worms. Very important, remember this one is the one that locks you into worms. This is less relevant because we're not playing Baronne because it's so expensive, but do be aware of that. This obviously makes, in hand with any other Tenyi, makes a level 8 synchro by itself. Obviously, being able to summon any Tenyi monster from your deck is incredibly strong at just the cost of having a non-effect monster. And of course, we play Monk of the Tenyi, which means any Tenyi is, in and of itself, a non-effect monster. Also, don't forget to use your Tenyi effects when you've made that token, which from the Swordsoul monsters, which of course is a non-effect monster itself. And then finally, we have 3 copies of, or I say finally, it's not actually finally, 3 copies of Tenyi Spirit Vishuddha. This is a bounce. It's another level 7, which obviously goes very nicely with Adhara, and you can banish this card to target one card your opponent controls, return it to the hand. Very, very strong, allows you to obviously bounce any card, means it doesn't trigger any on-destruction effects, outs problematic extra cards, and so on. Remember, you can banish the Tenyis from your hand, they do not need to be in the graveyard. Therefore, if you keep them in your hand, you can play through things like Dweller, you can stop the Ishizu cards from shuffling them back before you can use their effects. Then, actually finally this time, is our Tenyi Spirit Shithana. This is mainly here as a level 4 target for Heavenly Dragon Circle. If our Moye or our Tayar gets impermed, we can quickly use Heavenly Dragon Circle, swap it out for Shithana, and then the effect to summon a token will still go off. Obviously we won't get the Synchro effect, but at least we can make a Synchro monster. So it has the normal Tenyi effect, and then it has a slightly different effect. If a face-up non-effect monster is destroyed by battle or card effect, note it can be your own battle or card effect. You can crash your Monk or use something like Blackout to proc this, and you get to target the destroyed monster after banishing this card from the graveyard, and then you get to special summon it and destroy a monster your opponent controls. This is a card that opponents don't play around. It's a card that's effect only comes up occasionally, but can be very, very valuable in breaking some particularly sticky boards. We play 2 Incredible Ecclesia the Virtuous. We're playing 2 of this because we're playing main deck evenly matched. Whilst this card is very, very good, we don't want to be in a situation where we top deck this card and we have not an evenly matched, a Rivalry of Warlords, I mean. We're playing Rivalry of Warlords. We don't want to be in a situation where we top deck this card and then can't summon it to use its effect because we're locked into worms. So, because this is a spellcaster. Other than that, it's very, very good. It's a free special summon if we're going second most of the time. It's a tuner in its own right if our Moye or our Tayar gets negated. And obviously it fetches any of the Swordsouls from the deck. We are playing hand traps because we can. Because the Swordsoul engine has space for them, and we can't afford the expensive going second cards. So we're playing 3 Ghost Bell. This is obviously very, very good against any of the Ishizu tier effects. Stops the Shufflers, and stops their fusion effects, which are the most important effects to hit. And then we're playing 2 Effect Veiler. This is mainly for saying no to their copy of Kit Kalos. For our spells, we play 3 copies of Swordsoul Emergence. This is the Searcher. Searches a Swordsoul, or if you control a Synchro, you get to search a Worm monster. Then if it's banished, you get to target a Swordsoul or Worm monster and modulate its level 1 up or 1 down. This is how we get into things like Yazi, outside of using Adhara. 3 Heavenly Dragon Circle. This card is amazing. Tribute any Worm monster. Search a Worm monster, or if you tributed a non-effect monster, you can special summon it instead. So, as I said, it searches any Worm monster. It searches your Swordsouls. You can trade off a Monk for any Swordsoul. You can trade off a Tenyi you've used for any Swordsoul. You can trade off a Swordsoul token for a Tenyi, which you can then special summon. The implications of this card are huge. It lets you dodge hand traps and targeted removal and negation by being a quick play spell. And the later stage of a game, it's a very powerful search card in its own right, just by controlling a non-effect monster, which again, we do a lot. The way they use this card and the way they climb into Yazi and Baxia is how you tell a good Sword Soul player from a bad one. Two copies of Pot of Desires. We are the deck that makes the best use of Pot of Desires. There's so much redundancy in the deck. We just need to see a certain number of worms and we will make a board that does something. And then being able to see extra extension, extra hand traps is just gravy on top. There are no critical one-offs or anything in this deck that we worry about. One Called by the Grave, because graveyard decks suck and you have to play it, and Called by the Grave is the most powerful card in the game at the moment, probably. And I mean individually powerful. For our traps, we're playing 2 infinite impermanents. Ideally this would be 3, but I cut it to keep it under £100, so no one tell me this deck isn't budget. But we know what Imperm does. It's now £5 or £6 each. Please, please, please buy your copies of this card. This is a really, really important card to have in your collection. It goes in every single deck that can fit it in. Obviously, it's good going first, it's good going second. You're never unhappy to see this card in your opening hand. Three copies of Rivalry of Warlords. We make pretty much exclusively worms. Because of that, it's very, very good. It locks decks out of the game. We make exclusively worms, we don't care. It really, really hurts decks like Tia, because all they can do is make Kit Callus. And then finally, we play the One Sword Soul Blackout, searchable card, one of the strongest cards. Monk, Qixing, Rivalry with a Blackout set is very, very, very strong. Obviously, this can, if you are locked into worms and with Rivalry, and you have an Ecclesia in hand, and this, you can obviously break their board, popping your worm, summon the Ecclesia, and so on. Obviously, you're still locked now into spellcasters, but it depends on what options you have. And then, if this card is banished, you get to make a token, which can really, really help in later stages of the game, where you just need access to synchro plays. For the extra deck, we play 2 copies of Qixing. Qixing has 2 effects, one where it searches any Sword Soul card. You're normally searching Blackout, sometimes you will search Emergence or Longyuan or a level 4. And then you can banish a Sword Soul or Worm from your hand or graveyard, target an effect monster on the field, and negate its effects until the end of this turn. Remember that banishes for cost, they cannot shuffle back what you're trying to banish with an Ishizu card. Note, its effects are once per turn and 1 effect per turn. You don't get to search and then negate, you can only do 1 of them. So just don't mess up that. If you need something that you need to negate, don't accidentally search with it. We then have Sword Soul, Supreme Sovereign, Chengying, or Big Chungus. For each banish card, this card gains 100 attack and defense, and each monster your opponent controls loses 100 attack and defense. This card plus Desires is amazing. If this card would be destroyed by battle or by card effect, banish a card from your graveyard instead. If a card is banished, except during the damage step, banish 1 card each from opponent's field and graveyard. Again, that effect does not target, it will resolve on a new chain, so just be aware of that, but obviously it will trigger if they do something like use one of the Ishizu shufflers, try and shuffle stuff back from your deck. It's very, very good. It's your OTK material, it's obviously non-targeting, non-destroying removal, and graveyard interruption, and it can be very, very sticky and difficult to remove. Sword Soul, Sinister Sovereign, Qixing Longyuan. This is the level 10 you will make most of the time on your turn 1 if you make a level 10. When you synchro summon another worm, you can draw one. While this monster is on the field, you can draw one card. That's a very, very good ability. We are not normally drawing more than one card with this effect, because we have to minus ourselves to make it in the first place, because we need to use Longyuan. But it's very nice if we can, and without hand traps being quite as prevalent at the moment, sometimes you can get away more with making this first. And then, if your opponent summons a monster, banish that monster and inflict 1200 to your opponent. When your opponent activates a spell, trap, or effect, banish that card and inflict 1200 damage to your opponent. Again, helps you win in time, provides you with non-targeting removal, as well as spell trap removal. This deck OTKs really, really easily, and the burn from Longyuan and its synchro form are part of the reasons behind it. We now have the best synchro in the extra deck, Backrow. Backrow is, when it's synchro summoned, target cards on the field up to the number of different attributes used for this synchro summon, shuffle them into the deck. We normally make this with Taya and a token, or we make it with Tenyi's, which will always give us 2 shuffles. Just remember, Moye and a token will only give us 1 shuffle, because the token is water. Then you can target 1 card you control and 1 level 4 or lower monster in your graveyard, destroy the card on the field, and summon that monster from the graveyard. You are normally targeting itself and popping itself to summon that card from the graveyard, although sometimes you are popping your own rivalry, so you can make plays with an Ecclesia in hand, and so on. But most of the time you're popping itself to resurrect Taya or a Moye and going from there. This card is how you clear the board for your OTK. Remember, neither of these effects are hard once per turn. If you can make 2 Backrows, you get to spin 4 cards. This card is incredible. It does so much the deck needs by providing it with easy access to removal on a level 8 synchro. The other Yangzing is Yazi. Remember, Yazi cannot be targeted by opponent's card effects. That's very important. Do not forget that bit. You will not make Yazi very often. If you make Yazi, it should win you the game. Yazi lets you target a Yangzing and 1 card your opponent controls to destroy them both. Obviously, again, targeted removal in this deck is very, very good, when most of it is tied to Vishuddha or your level 10 synchros. Yazi, again, allows you to get rid of any problem card on the field. Again, it gets rid of spell traps, gets rid of Mystic Mine, and things like that if your opponent's left a monster on the field. Then, most importantly, when this card is destroyed by card effect, like its own card effect, you get to summon any worm-type monster from your deck. So, it gets you Moye, it gets you a Tenyi, it gets you Taya. This card is incredible. Again, you don't make it every time, but when you do make it, it should win you the game. Draco Berserker of the Tenyi, this is the anti-Havness card. None of the Tenyi effects to summon themselves activate. So if you can make a level, and the Tenyi effects that activate in graveyard can't be Havnessed, because Havness only affects cards on the field. So if you can make Draco Berserker of the Tenyi with an Adhara and an Ashina or a Vishuddha without activating anything on the field, and then your opponent tries to Havness you, you just banish the Havness. They don't get to summon it. You just get to banish it, and then they don't summon it, they don't mill. Also, again, absolute OTK monster, 3k attack, double attacker is very, very, very strong. But the main thing is being able to banish anything that activates an effect. Again, also very, very good against Kit Kalos. One Xiaofeng, we mainly make this with lights because we're making this usually with Backrow. Most of the time, this would be used to stop your opponent from nibbing you, or in times where more light monsters were played, it was obviously more impressive. Now, it's very much a piece used for something like Exosister, because then they just can't play the game. But it's still a nice piece. We have space for it because we're not running Baronne, so it's a nice piece to have in the extra deck. We then have our flex spots. We're not playing a super poly board. Some people do. I'm playing 1 Dragite. Dragite gives us a spell trap negate, which is very, very nice to have. because we usually have a water monster in the graveyard. Usually Moye or Shithana are in the grave. And it's just another level 8 3k synchro that we can easily make. And then our level 10 that we're running is Ruddy Rose Dragon. Ruddy Rose Dragon gets to banish all cards from the graveyards, which, if your opponent has just stacked their graveyard full of tears, is really, really painful for them. Obviously, they will get to shuffle some of them back with Ishizu cards, but this, at the right time, can be very, very backbreaking. The other thing that it does is, if a card effect that activates that would destroy a card, this gets to negate it. Then you can is obviously optional, so you don't need a Black Rose Dragon. For our links, we play the standard package of 3 Monk of the Tenyi. This card is annoyingly expensive, but it's there. It's a link 1. It's a non-effect monster. That's why we need it. And then we play the 1 Shaman of the Tenyi. Sometimes comes up, sometimes doesn't. Again, just remember this card will lock you into Tenyi monsters summoned from the extra deck, activating their effects. So it can be a bit painful to activate at the wrong time. And sometimes it gets some extra removal, which can be nice. So that is the deck. I love Swordsoul. It's a really fun deck to play. It's got a high skill ceiling, but it's a very easy deck to pick up and play. You're just making level 4, level 8 and level 10 synchros. But the nuances really come out when you learn how to use the Tenyis and the Yangzing synchros to turn almost an empty board into an OTK. So I hope you enjoyed the deck. The deck does not need Baronne as much as it did. You don't usually end on Baronne turn 1. It's a nice card to have on later turns, because it's very, very good on a simplified game state. But that is the big miss this deck has. So if you have one hanging around, or you're feeling like putting some money down on a Baronne, be my guest. It will make this deck better, but you can play it without the Baronne. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you again soon. Thanks for watching.